Good afternoon and welcome to this BISG coffee break seminar on internationalizing your metadata, presented by me, Graham Bell, and my editor colleague, Chris Sainer. The previous seminar in this series by Caroline Hayes of WW Norton and Tom Richardson of BookNet Canada gave you an insight into ONIX, the standard metadata format used to communicate bibliographic information, marketing collateral, and commercial detail in the book's supply chain. So we're going to assume today that you're using ONIX for your metadata and you have an IT system that helps you manage that metadata and distribute to your ONIX files. But to this point, you're probably mostly thinking about your metadata in the context of the domestic market. Now, in many cases, the true market for your books is an international one. For physical products, the realities and costs of distance often place some commercial limitations on that. But for digital products, geography is much less important. Don't make assumptions that the only market that matters is the domestic market. And Editor's ONIX was envisioned from the outset to be a standard that would be suitable for global use. Although ONIX originated within the Association of American Publishers, the very first editor documentation that I can find from March of 2000 was even titled ONIX International. Over the years since then, it's been revised, refined, and widely adopted across North America, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region, with some implementations in China, Africa, and Latin America. ONIX and your metadata have truly gone global. So what Chris and I will present today are a few guidelines that should help you optimize your metadata for broad international use and without compromising it for the domestic market. We can't show you exactly how to do it in your own system, but we'll show you what the ONIX data should look like. Now, for many people, the international trade in books brings to mind commodity codes. Our editor application note on this topic that we released late last year was one of the most often downloaded new app notes on our website. And it may be why Brian asked us to do this presentation. We've certainly seen an uptick of interest in commodity codes since Brexit and the massive pandemic-related jump in the cost of global shipping. Now, commodity codes are declarations about your own products that can be used by governments, shippers, and customs for the administration of tariffs, import and export quotas, trade statistics, and the regulation of foreign trade. Most of the world uses commodity codes based on the World Customs Organization's harmonized system. Each type of product, being it animal feed, a book, iron ore, or an automobile, gets given a commodity code. Usually that's a 6-digit number. But many countries customize the harmonized system because they want more granular categories of goods that they can measure, tax, or control. For example, in the UK, we use the HMRC customs codes, 8 digits for exports and 10 digits for imports. The European Union uses the tariff codes, which are very similar. In the US, you use Schedule B codes for exports from the USA and HTSA codes for imports into the USA, and both are 10-digit numbers. Here's how these commodity codes can be expressed in ONIX. As you can see, there's a product classification composite. Actually, there are 3 on screen, and the first specifies a detailed Schedule B code for export from the US, which, because this product happens to be a rack-sized paperback, carries the code 4901.99.00.75. Well, why do you need anything more than this? Because when you export from the US using Schedule B, you'll be importing into another country, and their customs might need their import code. Send books to your distributor in the UK, and they'll need the 10-digit HMRC import code. So the second product classification composite is the HMRC code for import into the UK, which, as it happens, doesn't differentiate by size. And while you might list the codes for your most common export destinations, you can't list them all. So the generic 4901.99 code from the harmonized system is a good fallback. You'll also notice that although these commodity codes are often quoted with periods, 4901.99 and so on, in the ONIX, they always appear without punctuation. As well as the commodity codes, it's often important to specify the country of manufacture of your product. Now, this sometimes gets called the country of origin, and maybe because of that, it gets mixed up with country of publication. These aren't the same. The country of publication is where the publishing company is based, but the country of manufacture is where the product is physically made. And for a book, that's not where the raw materials like the paper came from. It's where it's printed and bound. Occasionally, it's where it's finally packaged. There are some complex rules around where the bulk of the value was added. Unfortunately, country of manufacture is only suitable for simple cases. Occasionally, you need to be a little more wary. For example, when a product has multiple parts, there's no guarantee that all the parts are manufactured in the same place. So the country of manufacture tag can be used separately inside each product part composite when that's necessary. You also need to be careful when the country of manufacture changes through the life cycle of the book. It's moderately common to manufacture in one country for speed of delivery, then later on move manufacturing to another country to take advantage of lower unit costs. And print on demand can be problematic as well. If your POD manufacturer has several locations, they may well choose the factory closest to the end customer. Different individual copies can be manufactured in different countries, and the publisher might not even be aware of that. For POD arrangements like this, the country of manufacture should be omitted. And while we're thinking about physical goods for the international book trade, your weights and dimensions should be specified using metric units, millimeters and grams, opposite your inches and ounces, like this. As you can see, this is a rack-size paperback, 6 7/8 inches high and 4 1/4 wide, and that's about 175 by 108 millimeters. I suspect that most IT systems that can produce ONIX metadata can be configured to do this automatically. Chris.
Hello, I'm Chris Sainer. Now, what Graham introduced there was for physical products only. Another thing you need to do for physical and digital is to let people know where your titles can be sold and where they cannot. You do this by using the sales rights composite in ONIX. It's very important to include full information about this. Your ONIX often goes to global retailers and they need to know whether they can sell your edition to customers in all of the countries they operate in. But you might not have the rights in all of the countries. If you provide incomplete data, if you don't let retailers know which countries they can't sell to, you might find yourself having to deal with cross-colleagues from Britain or legal letters from publishers whose rights you have infringed. You also need to be very clear. What exactly do you mean when you say your title is available for sale in the domestic market? Do you mean the USA, just the 50 states? Or do you also mean the overseas territories of the US? Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, the American Virgin Islands, and the other ones. All of these have their own codes, so need to be included in either the for sale list or the not for sale list. The same applies with concepts like North America or Europe. Exactly what countries and territories are included. This is why computer systems use codes for precision. ONIX 3 sales rights, both positive and negative, must be comprehensive. And if you really don't know, there is an option for unknown, though a smart retailer will always treat this as if it means probably not for sale. Editor has an application note on the expression of sales rights too. Quite often, as in this example, the sales rights can be fairly simple. There's a list of all the countries where this product with this ISBN is for sale: Canada, the US, and its various overseas territories. And there's a complementary list comprising the world except those same countries and overseas territories where the product is not for sale. Expressing your complementary territories like this is much clearer than if you try to create a huge list of all the 241 individual countries where this book is not for sale. You can see at a glance that between the two sales rights composites, we've got the whole world covered. There's no ambiguity at all and no chance of missing a country out. Now, if you've sold the European or the Commonwealth rights to a sister publishing house in the UK, you can go a little further than just making sure your sales rights information is correct and complete. You can link to the ISBN of their other version that they make available in other markets. This allows global retailers to link to the correct edition for customers who are buying from, for example, the UK or Australia. This Code 32 relationship shown on screen is also very useful where you yourselves have separate export and domestic editions, for example, in the textbook market. The related product composite is all about making these sorts of links, from the 4th edition back to the 3rd and forward to the 5th edition, or between the hardcover and the softcover versions of a title, as well as to these equivalents for other markets. They all use the same related product composite, but with different product relation codes. Graham.
Once you've specified the complete list of countries where your product can be sold, you need to think about how those products are distributed through the supply chain. This is what Block 6, which Caroline and Tom mentioned in the previous seminar, is all about. In the very simplest case, you have a single product available across many countries, but it's always fulfilled from a single distribution point. Retailers in every country where the book is for sale get their copies from the same one distributor or vendor of record. And there's a single uniform market that covers all of these countries. In more complex cases, you might have more than one point of distribution. Imagine an academic publisher. His books are available globally, but they maintain 3 separate distribution centres, one in New England, another in actual England, and a third in Singapore. Each distributor has its own exclusive distribution territory: the Americas, the Europe, the Middle East and Africa market, and Asia Pacific region. In this case, you have 3 separate markets that can operate more or less independently. Each market has a specific geographical extent, like EMEA. It has its own primary distributor, or exclusive supplier in ONIX terms. It has its own market-specific publishing status, and one market could have a later market-specific pub date than the others. And within each of these markets, you might even have a local publisher or a sales agent. In ONIX terms, these are called publisher representatives. And then there might be secondary suppliers, wholesalers, who operate within each of the markets too. This might seem confusing at first, but that's mostly because it just doesn't work like it did in ONIX 2.1. ONIX 3, in fact, has a more logical structure that matches the realities of international distribution much better. There's a hierarchy: markets, suppliers within those markets, and the prices that those suppliers charge. It looks like this. Of course, your whole ONIX record, represented by the giant orange square, describes the book. Within that metadata for the product, you have a market. It has a geographical extent. Maybe it has some dates or customer types that differentiate it from other markets. And this market has a supplier that operates in the market and charges various prices according to country, currency, customer type, and so on. In the ONIX, this is all described inside product supply, and the supplier, the distributor, is specified inside supply detail. And then you have a second market. It has a different geographical extent, maybe different dates. And in this market, there are two suppliers. One is a primary distributor and one is a wholesaler. So in the ONIX, we have a second product supply, and within that, we have two supply detail composites, one for each of the suppliers. The two markets' geographical extents don't overlap. Each of the distributors has an exclusive distribution territory, but together they add up to the geographical extent of the overall sales rights. Now, it's an obscure point, but for reasons related to block updates, Block 6 consists of all the markets together, rather than there being a Block 6 for each individual market. Product supply is repeatable, but all the repeats together constitute Block 6. On the previous slide, each supplier offers a range of different prices based on country. Remember, a market can cover many individual countries. And so never make the mistake that currency implies country. If you set a price in US dollars, it doesn't automatically mean that the price is for the USA. Now in the US and Canada, you use price type 01 to specify recommended retail prices excluding the tax. Tax will be added at the checkout. And you probably know that in the UK, we use price type equals 02 to specify recommended retail prices including the tax. But much of the rest of the world doesn't work like this. Many countries, Mexico, Korea and Japan, and much of the European Union have fixed price laws or trade agreements, meaning the publisher or the importer or the local sales agent or the distributor has to fix a price, and retailers have to sell at that price. The legal scope for price reductions at retail is strictly limited. Now you can do these fixed prices in ONIX using price type equals 03 for a fixed retail price excluding the local taxes, or if you're able to specify the local tax too, you could use price type equals 04.
So that gets most of the commercials out of the way. So what about describing the product itself? Making your metadata good for a global market includes specifying things like the language. Don't assume that people know your books are in English just because you're based in the USA, because sometimes they could be in Spanish. It's pretty simple to add information into your ONIX file about what language your title is written or recorded in using the language composite. You can also say what language it was translated from, and by the way, if it was translated, don't forget to name the translator as one of the contributors. And for some types of book, you can express what language the book is about, but this time using the subject codes. So here's a nice example. This is a kid's book which shares 6 terms for caribou at various stages in their life cycle. It introduces the youngest readers to the rich Inuktitut vocabulary for these important animals. The book has text in what's called Canadian Aboriginal syllabics, written in Inuktitut script, plus Inuktitut language written with the Latin script, and English language written in Latin script. So it's a bilingual book, Inuktitut and English, but one of those languages is included twice, because you can also specify the script as well. And here's a second example. Language as a subject is important, and you can use your bisect codes and your thema codes to tell people what language the book is about. In this case, at the top, I've shown the thema codes and qualifiers to specify that it's a phrase book for Mexican Spanish. This book is primarily in English, but it's about Mexican Spanish. In ONIX, the two language composites let readers know that this book has content in both English and Spanish. And notice that the SPA code for Spanish is qualified with the country code for Mexico, so you can indicate what type of Spanish this is. The same principle works with English too. If it's important, as it is sometimes with audiobooks, you could tell people it has a voice actor using a strong American accent, or Canadian accent, or a Scottish or English accent. With this type of phrase book, you should also be clear that this title is aimed at an English language audience. It very much would not work for a Mexican who wanted an English phrase book.
Because it's suitable for global use, it's obvious that ONIX is designed to work for books that are written in more or less any language. Whatever language your book is written in, you can specify it in ONIX. Maybe it's a little less obvious because all the ONIX long tags are English words, but your metadata can also be in any language. Whatever language you want your short description or your biographical note to be in, you can include that. But what's not at all obvious is that in ONIX 3 you can potentially include a short description or a biographical note in multiple languages at the same time. If you want your metadata in both Korean and Finnish, or more likely you want it in both Spanish and English, then you can do that too. Here's how. You'll see here there are two biographical note tags. The biography is repeated first in English and then in Spanish. The English and Spanish versions say much the same thing. Now I'm using biographical note as an example here, but the same applies to almost all of the textual metadata fields in ONIX 3. If you do this, there's a requirement to add the language attribute, which is shown on screen in green. So the data recipient can make a smart choice about whether to display one or other, or both the languages, according to what their customers need. If you only have one biographical note, there's no need for the language attribute. The data recipient doesn't have a choice anyway. But if you do provide multilingual metadata, the language attribute becomes mandatory. You'll also see in this example that it uses the recommended way of embedding XHTML markup tags within the ONIX, with text format equals 05 and no CData and no escaping of ampersand LT semicolon. Chris.
Talking of contributor biographies, where is your author from? Where do they live now? If you have a Canadian author, or illustrator, or translator, or voice actor, then let people know. Your trade partners in Canada will be more than happy with you. And don't stop with Canada. Think about this for all your main contributors. It helps readers, educators, and librarians who are specifically looking for writers from different cultures. But this is also a win for your resellers inside the USA who want to run local author promotions. Here's an example of an author. In fact, this is Michael Ondaatje, who has a Dutch and Sinhalese background, who was born in Sri Lanka, educated partly in England, and is now a Canadian citizen who lives in Toronto. Another simple thing you can do is add an identifier alongside your contributors' names. The ISNI, or International Standard Name Identifier, for example. An identifier allows much more reliable linking of data, like author names, independent of language and script. Think of the Greek bookstore, which sells your titles, having to manually check and match the name of your author with the Greek script version of her name. An identifier allows for automation of this process. It means they don't mix your authors up. And think also of authors who share names, and how this affects retailers who create author pages that, in the absence of an ISNI, usually end up mixing together books by different contributors who just happen to have the same name. Subject coding is one of those things that was for many years done differently in each country, even if that country used ONIX. For your domestic market, BISG is the way you do it. It's a mature scheme, universally accepted, and carefully matches the requirements of the market. But in much of the rest of the world, thema is increasingly the way to go. Like ONIX, it's a scheme designed from the outset for international use. It's multilingual, and it's gradually replacing many of the old national schemes like BIG, WGS, NUR, or the Japanese C code. If what you've got already is BISAC, you can at least make a start with thema using a mapping process. BISG's subject committee produced the mapping, and BookNet Canada has built an automated tool to help you map your BISAC codes in bulk. And of course, you can put both BISAC and thema codes into your ONIX. So here's the publisher's selection of BISAC codes for this book, and you add those codes into the subject composite. Don't forget, if you have more than one BISAC code, you should indicate which one is the most important using the main subject flag. Then add your thema codes as well. It's a different scheme and it works in a slightly different way. It has subject codes, but in addition, it has qualifiers for places, time periods, educational purposes, and so on. Here's my selection of thema codes for this book. If you mapped the main BISAC code, you get YNMD, which probably makes a good thema main subject too. But there are other good thema codes as well. Mapping is okay to start with, but it's better to treat BISAC and thema separately once you've got going. And thema has the advantage of being international. It's currently translated into 26 languages. And so given the same codes, a bookstore specializing in Spanish language material could use these Spanish subject headings when displaying this book to its customers. Now, with ONIX alongside your subject codes, you can let people know a little bit about your audience. This is especially important in titles aimed at children, teenagers, and the K-12 education market. The ONIX here gives an interest age range from ages 4 to 8. Don't rely on only using US school grades for general titles. Always include an indication of interest age. This makes it easier for an international audience to choose the right titles. Including ages helps. Terms like middle grade or young adult are being used a lot, but they often mean something quite different in other countries.
So to round off this session, I'll say that the business of books has increasingly become a global business with global requirements for metadata. Of course, there are differences between how the industry operates in different countries, but the differences in metadata requirements were never that big, and if anything, they're decreasing. ONIX, and specifically ONIX 3, provides the necessary support for these globalized business requirements, whether it's the simple ability to deliver measurements in both millimeters and inches, or the admittedly complex modeling of international distribution and pricing. And there are things you can do that we haven't even covered today, like providing different marketing collateral for different markets, or attaching time zones to sales embargo dates when you do a Harry Potter style timed global reveal. You might be thinking, so what? But don't ignore that export market for your English language output. And equally, don't ignore the domestic market for books in other languages. The US has a significant Spanish-speaking and Spanish-reading population. Canada has a large French language market, and both countries are home to sizable diasporas that might sometimes want to read in Arabic or Korean or other languages. That's all we want to say today. Chris will try to answer any questions you have right now, and if you want to follow up later, here's our email addresses.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to us. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Yes, we'll remain here for a little while longer for anyone who wants to ask something. But here's a starter question for you, Chris. From your experience, which kinds of international metadata do publishers get wrong most often?
Probably in the sales rights. people thinking about the domestic market or, for example, for this audience, the US, Canada being the only markets that count, forgetting that those sales rights will often go to international retailers who may be getting other metadata about the same ISBN from other sources, and then they get conflicts in the sales rights. In the UK, there's a lot of sharing between UK and the US, the same title, different markets, different rights, and conflicts arise when British publishers sees the American edition for sale in the UK. Often this comes from a lack of information in the sales rights or conflicting data. So I'd say sales rights. I see there's a question from Judith.
Yeah, if you
Judith,
want to tackle that,
yep.
Yeah, go for it. Repeat the question, please. Thank you.
So Judith is asking, can we give any advice on dealing with books in non-Roman languages, Chinese, Arabic, Russian? Yeah, ONIX is truly international. As we were trying to illustrate with the Inuktitut example, you can send, just because the tags themselves, we use English words, but the data you can send within those can be in any language and any script. When you create your ONIX, you'll make a declaration at the top of your XML message, which will say what coding you're using, and if you will be using a Unicode UTF-8 or 16, which can cope with most of these characters. We do have a paper on including different kinds of markup, creating a basic message on our website that we can point you to. Does that answer your question, Judith? Yes, Judith. So a follow-up, Judith's asking, would we put author bios in Chinese, for example? I'd say yes. Including multilingual metadata can be really useful. What you're doing by doing that is offering people who you send data to choices. So you may have clients looking for your publishing authors, you're publishing books in translation. Maybe the book was originally in Chinese or you're publishing them in Chinese. So people are doing searches. What people will search for is their native language. Their browser will default them to that language. So definitely include the Chinese biography if you can. For example, another source is if you're selling international rights for your books, you may often have a short description in some of the main languages. You could always include that in your metadata as well.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I see another question popped in. I was just going to step in, but please, it's a good question.
Jennifer's asking, should keywords be internationalized? Is it worth the effort to increase discoverability? When you're looking at your keywords, I would say yes. I mean, especially if you're creating content that is going to be available globally, you're creating a digital version, you have world rights or you have rights to a lot of countries. Think about the words, as you should always do, think about the words you're putting into the keywords. And obviously, for American and Canadian publishers, those are the two biggest markets for you. But if you've got potential sales, think about the words that you're putting in. Yes. But keywords, you only have a limited number. Certain big companies have made it public how many they now accept. So you're going to have to think about the number you can put in. But along with that, when you do your marketing texts, it's ONIX allows you to create different marketing texts for different markets. So you can, for certain retailers, tailor so here's a description that I've done specifically for the UK market. Here's one I'm doing for the Latin American market. And you can specify in your ONIX 3, this is the descriptive text for Latin America. With that one, you have to make sure people you're sending ONIX to can actually cope with it, actually pick it up, but there's a potential to do that in ONIX 3 as well.
Maybe we can give just another 10 seconds or so for any final questions, but if no one out there has anything, we thank you, Chris, for your time, and thank Graham in absentia for putting together a really great, informative, and I think helpful presentation. For anyone who missed the first portion of this, it will be shared shortly. And thank you, Judith, for your great questions. Thank you, Chris, and that's a wrap today, folks.
Thank you, everyone.